Well, my name is Pablo Perez. I work for NDS. I'm a consultant hired by the city, and we specialize in assessment districts and these types of special financing districts. So you have like a Melrose, if you ever heard of that, or an assessment district. That's what we do. I think we know already who's here tonight, but I'll make sure on the screen the districts we're going to cover are on the slide. We got district number 2, which is Channel Islands, VOLVO MEDIAN, Rose Island, Pacific Cove, American Pacific Homes, Channel Point, and then there's District 50, which we call it Pleasant Valley Senior, but what's the name of that community?
Pacific Point.
Pacific Point, and then Westwood. Okay. It's a form of intro for those watching the video. If you don't know where you are, and you'll be posting the slides, right? Yeah, the first few slides contain the maps. You can locate what assessment district you're in. Before I go into that, I want to kind of introduce what an assessment district is and how we all got here, right? How you have an assessment district in your property. When a developer, this is very common in cities in California, when a developer comes to town and they build a subdivision, they're required to do some landscaping work and set up some improvements that the city will continue to maintain, including sidewalks and things like that, right? So they, in essence, the city requires them to mitigate or to pay for improvements that they need to be maintained in the future, but the property owners are the ones who are going to really be paying for it. So the city offers to the developer the opportunity to set up an assessment district. As an alternative to that, a developer may just write a check, which of course never happens, right? So instead what you get is an assessment district, it's a financing mechanism, and then all the properties within that district area will pay over so many years. In case of a maintenance district, it's in perpetuity. So you're paying for the maintenance of these improvements, okay? So that's how that starts. These are very common in California because we are limited in California to what we can charge on our property tax bill. Thanks to Prop 13, passed in '78, you can only charge about 1% of the ad valorem of the value of the home. That's your ad valorem tax. And so these additional financing tools are necessary. In a city like Oxnard, I don't know that many people know this, but when you pay your 1% tax amount on your property tax bill, they get only 17 cents on each dollar. So the city actually doesn't get all that money. That money is distributed to various agencies, fire departments, and different types of agencies within the jurisdiction. So they really don't get a lot of funding. Furthermore, from the money they get, so if you look at the general fund and all the things they're supposed to do, most cities in the state, approximately around, they have a public safety budget that it's about 55 to 65% of their general fund. So that's very common. Most of the money in that general fund is being used for public safety. So it leaves very little money actually to do maintenance of streets and landscaping and all these other improvements, and that's where assessment districts come in and allow for property owners to help pay the bill, right? Very important to note that not everybody in the city has an assessment district. Okay, so older areas of the city, prior to Prop 13, for example, when there was no need for assessment districts because taxes could be increased every year by the city, they may not have an assessment district. So newer developments are the ones that contain these assessment districts. You, as a property owner in an assessment district, should be getting improvements that are maintained regularly, which you're paying for. These things can include it could include sidewalks or many things. So tonight's districts, all of them have 3 things in common. All districts pay for landscaping, tree trimming, and debris removal. Okay, that's what all of them have in common. Now, in addition to that, some of the districts have additional improvements that are authorized for which these funds pay for. For example, District 27, which is Rose Island, pays for sidewalks, fencing, and graffiti removal. Okay? So you'll see that throughout these districts where there are additional improvements that, it depends on the district. So when the developer comes to town, that's how that's determined. The next doc, so the one thing you should be familiar with is that every district has an engineer's report. It's a formation report that provides all the detail as to what you're paying for, what the boundaries are, and what the rates are. So every district has this, every district has a report that is specific to that district, and that's very important. The city has a website. So if you go to the main city website and you look on the top left corner, you'll see an actual link that says Maintenance Assessment Districts, okay? So if you click on that, that will take you to a page where we're storing all the reports, everything I mentioned tonight, all the slides, presentations, any report, it's there. So it's, you just go to the main city website page and select Maintenance Assessment Districts on the top left side, okay? Eventually we'll have all the engineers' reports as well, so everybody should be able to see them. All right, so that's a little intro. So how do we get here? The city is currently working on an assessment of the organization, and so they have set up this vision for 2020. We're working on the bottom of this pyramid, and from that component, they have identified 120 items that they need to work on. Okay? Of the 120 items, we are one item, benefit assessment, inside of item 5. Okay? So that's what we're discussing tonight, and that's how the city has retained our firm to perform an audit of these districts. So the city had me, or had our firm, prepare our first initial audit report, which we introduced to council in October. That audit report essentially took a broad view of what the assessment districts were like, what the staff was doing, how things were being managed at the city. And from that report, we made additional recommendations to council as to additional audits and work that needed to be done in order to complete the audits. And so at this point, we have completed those audits, and that's what we're going through the city and sharing those findings with property owners, okay? So that's the reason for tonight's meeting. Some of the audits completed include the district boundary audit, okay? So you'll have that on the screen. What a district boundary is the search for parcels that are within the assessment district, for example. They're supposed to be in the assessment district, yet they're not being charged, okay? Or the opposite of that, which would be parcels outside of the district. They're not supposed to be charged, but may be charged, okay? Again, the charges for these assessment districts show up in your property tax bill, so that's what we're actually reviewing is the property tax bill records against the maps and the engineer's report that shows what parcels are in or out, okay? We also set up and updated internal policies for the city on how to manage these districts, as well as establish levels of service. The levels of service are on the website and on this page for maintenance assessment districts. And it refers to, for example, how often a level A of service, how often you may mow the lawn or trim the hedges or things like that. How often the maintenance work should happen. So what you have is a level A is the best level of service, B, C, D, E, and F, right? So it just gets worse. As I drive through the city, I will say that you're currently getting, for the most part, a C level of service, sometimes a D level of service, okay? Just based on the weeds and what's out there, right? That's what I see. The goal here is to get all these assessment districts to at least a level B. Remember, you're paying for these services, so to get to a level A, which is extremely, it really is manicure and perfect, may actually cost such an additional amount. And considering the drought, it may not be the best use of your money, but at least B is what we are hoping to get to, okay? So we have established those levels of service and posted that on the website so that we have a basis for communication in the future with property owners and city staff. We also audited the budgets. The budgets are initially included in your engineer's report for your district and then updated by the city every year. And as you know, costs change every year. You have water costs that have been going up quite rapidly. So we had to look at all the bills and all the records of the city to establish new budgets because the budgets that were being tracked were not accurate. The same we did with the levy calculation. So these levies are calculated based on a formula, and so we had to go back and recreate the formula or just apply the formula from the beginning to current to make sure that all the rates were correct. So we have completed those audits. To do that, we reviewed all the engineer's reports. We determined which districts are maintained by the city versus what districts are maintained by a contractor. About, I will say 24, 25 districts are city maintained. That means city staff is doing the work. They're the ones cutting cutting the trees or whatever they need to do. They're the ones doing the work. The other districts, about 30 plus, are being handled by subcontractors, and the city's currently using 2 firms. Okay, so we have to identify that. We reviewed all the utility invoices, water and electricity, and there were over 3,000 water invoices alone for a given year. So that was quite an undertaking. We had to review all the invoices for landscaping materials, receipts, credit card statements, how the city allocated or allocates staff time to the districts. We had to confirm the location of the meters. They're water meters and power meters that need to be identified and assigned to a district and make sure that we're being paid for correctly. And we reviewed all the 15, 16 tax roll records and assessment amounts. From all this work, we created new budgets, which is what we're presenting tonight for your districts, okay? And so the report that you see online has all 60 budgets or so, but for tonight we have created a slide just for your districts. We compare what the city levied versus what the actual amount should have been, and we calculated new, what we call maximum assessment levy amounts, right? And identified any issues. So since I mentioned maximum, I'll explain that concept right now. The engineer's report provides for what we call a maximum assessment, okay? What that means is that the city does not need to levy that amount every year. The city just needs to levy whatever it needs to provide the services up to that amount. The city can never exceed the maximum assessment. If it does, or if it wants to, it has to go out to a ballot process where you participate and you approve the additional amount, right, the increase. So there, the amounts are actually capped or maxed at this maximum assessment. That assessment amount is found in the report, the engineer's report, created back in the day when the district was established. And then many of the districts have an inflator. So you will inflate the maximum every year, increase it by the cost of living increase, and they will have their own particular inflators to use. And then, again, you increase that amount, but you don't have to levy that amount. You levy just what you need, okay? So you set the budgets, you set the max, and then compare that. If the budget is higher than the max, then you need to cut back in services. Does that make sense? If the budget is below the max, then you lower the max and you lower the levy. You don't actually, you keep the max there, but you only levy the amount that you need, okay? So that's how that works. So what do we find? This is a good slide. Most interesting slide. In looking at all these districts, the best thing is that we did not find any parcels outside of the districts that were being levied, because that would have meant that we were levying property owners on properties outside that had nothing to do with the school district. So we did not find that. We did find a number of parcels, a minimal number really, that were in assessment districts in this area that were not being captured. So for example, LMD2, which is Channel Islands, had about 5 parcels that were in the boundaries of the district, but have been dropped over the years. The total combined revenue of these 5 parcels is $44.30 a year. So it's not a major find. In addition, this district, LMD2 in particular, is a self-maintained district. So the city only levies a small amount every year, and the property owners through, I imagine, an HOA are doing their own work. So it's really not a critical finding from this perspective, because particularly the type of district it is. LMD2 also had 1 parcel that was being levied in error, and it was off by about $8 per year. So again, not a major find there. Most of the districts were levied consistent with the methodology. LMD2 had the most issues, as you can see. Again, small find for LMD2. 1 parcel in LMD 45, which is Channel Point, was levied at a higher rate per acre than it should have been. And so it was off about approximately a total of $20 per year. Again, not a major fine. So far so good. These are not major fines from that perspective. So when it comes to the boundary audit and the levy audit, not major findings to speak of, really. All of the districts were levied, except for one, at less than the maximum amount. I'm sorry, at the maximum or less than the maximum. So what that means is that there were no districts levied above the max, except for the one district, which is LMD 58. And remember what I mentioned, the city cannot levy of the max without going out to a ballot procedure. So LMD 58, which is Westwood, needs to be adjusted right away, and that's one of the major findings here tonight. The total amount per year on District 58 being levied over the max was about $10,000 a year. Okay, so that was the most significant finding from the levy audits for these districts here tonight covered by these slides. And again, that will be corrected immediately, so effective 16-17, those amounts will be brought back to the max or below that depending on the budget. Okay. An interesting finding, probably very significant to you, is that they were additional improvements that were authorized. Remember when I mentioned all the districts had landscaping, tree trimming, and debris removal, but many of them had additional improvements. Well, they were actually additional improvements that were authorized, but not being provided by the city. So they were not being provided by the contractor or the city staff in either scenario. This occurred because the city was using one single template to bid out the projects. So as the projects were bid out, they used this template that wasn't really customized for each district. And so currently we're preparing new bid packages for the city to go out and rebid all the projects anyway, to get a lower cost if possible. And then also to make sure that all the authorized improvements are covered. And so in essence, what you're paying for, you're then getting. So for example, if you look at District 41, which is Pacific Cove, some of the improvements that properties are paying for in that district, but they're not getting service, it's not being maintained, are the sidewalks within the boundary of the district. So the maintenance of the sidewalks should be covered, should be maintained, but it hasn't been happening. And then LMD 44, which is American Pacific Homes, and I think that's your district, right? Yeah, your district. The sidewalk and the median on Channel Islands Boulevard is not being maintained. It should be though, because that is what you're paying, it's one of the items you're paying for. LMD 45, Channel Point, had the medians on Channel Island Boulevard, Rose Avenue, also not being maintained, or at least not paid from the district, and indeed that should be paid from the district. LMD 50, which is Pleasant Valley Senior, you call Pacific Point, had the sidewalks on Butler Road, Pleasant Valley Road, all should be maintained by the assessment district and from the funds that you already paid for. The hardscape on Westwind, which is District 58, should also be maintained with assessment district funds. To me, that's a major finding because one of the major complaints I hear through the city is that properties are not happy with the level of maintenance. And as I mentioned on my own experience, to me, I will grade it as a C level. So having additional improvements that were authorized and not maintained is a major concern. So again, we are having the city update their records, make sure they rebid the projects out, and to include all these items in the bidding process so that these will now be maintained in the future. So when we looked at the budgets and the levy amounts and what everything should be, right? So after we audited everything, what we ended up with it are essentially from tonight we have 8 districts here that we're covering. 6 of the districts tonight have a projected annual surplus. What that means is that the audited maximum assessment is greater than the audited budget. So when we looked at the records, water consumption and all that, these districts are in pretty good shape, okay? So the goal for these districts is, number one, to catch up with the improvements, make sure they be where they need to be so that you get a better level of service, but also to then at the same time reduce the levy, what the properties are paying on the tax bill, because obviously you don't need all that, right? So to set the amounts correctly. And we're gonna do that for 16-17. That will show on your property tax bills due delinquent on December 10th, 2016, and April 10th, of 2017, so the next tax bill cycle. However, there were two districts, which are LMD 20, and that's VOLVO MEDIAN, and 27 Rose Island, where we have projected deficits. That means the assessment at the max wouldn't be sufficient to cover the costs, right? I'm going to show you the budgets next, but first I wanted to quickly go over the categories. These budgets have all these columns, and I just want to make sure everybody knows what they mean. And then, by the way, if you have any questions, feel free to interact at any time. Yes?
I wrote this one down, Pablo, thank you. What happens to the district funds of the $10,000 that are surplus? Do they get credited, basically, do they get credited to those residents that are in those districts, or that district?
So you mean the
surplus of the 58, District 58,
yeah,
thank you.
that was levied at a higher amount over the years?
Yes.
So currently we're working on the 2016-17 cycle. So the first goal for us, and there's a lot of work to be done between now and that moment, is to get the new rule corrected. Okay, so we need to correct that. In the fall, we're going to provide the city with a report that shows prior years and how much they over levy in that particular district. And so the city will have to decide what to do with that over levy. So if they're going to do refunds or what have you, it's something that's going to have to be discussed by council, and the decision will have to be made.
Okay, thank you for your presentation.
Absolutely. So on the budgets that I'm going to show, I'm going to make sure you want to look at the professional contracts column. That's what shows what the actual maintenance contract is by those two subcontractors doing the work. And again, it applies to a little bit over 30-something districts, right? Not all the districts, because some of them are handled by the city. And so if they're handled by city staff, you want to take a look at the direct cost column. That's what tells you if it's a city maintained, it will have a direct cost amount. And if it's a sub or a contractor, it will have a professional contract amount. So they're never going to have both, okay? So those are the two main, most important columns here. Obviously, utilities are important, given the high cost of water and the drought, so you want to kind of keep an eye on that as well. You had a question? What district are you in the back there? What district are you in, do you know?
I guess College Estates.
Which one?
College Estates, I believe, by Rose Island House.
You guys know which one that is? No, he's yeah, right? So you live in College Estates? Yeah, I'm not sure that you are in assessment district. Mike, can you check for us?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Then you came in a little later. What district are you in? Rose Island. Number 27. Okay, here. And I think I have one more person here in the back. Behind you, Julie. We have some maps. Mike, can you help her find her district as well? Can you help them find their district as well? Thank you.
He's in Rose Island.
He's in Rose Island? Okay, number 27. Good. Good to know.
Sign that sheet in the back as well. We haven't signed it. Oh, over.
All right. So let's take a look at these budgets, okay? Mark these to make sure we cover 27, Rose Island, number 50 and 44. So we have people here tonight. I don't know if you can see. Oh, there you go. Okay. So I'm looking at these budgets. Remember, these are the new budgets after we review all the records of the city. If you go online and you happen to look at a budget online that the city posted previously, you will notice they're different. So the stuff online from previous years will be incorrect. These are the new budgets from now on, okay? And now we're still tracking down a few items, so these numbers may change a little bit, but I will say for the most part, 90-95% this is pretty close as to what's gonna be. We'll be finishing up and getting a few more utility bills that we're missing in the next couple of months. So when we look at these budgets and you look at LMD2, it's a self-maintained district, so I'm not gonna really cover it much. What this means is that they do their own work. And so the city just charges $1,000 for the administrative and to keep it, to keep it on the books. but the actual work is being performed by the HOA or some other entity, and not really, not really by the city or under the city's control. Now, starting with number 20, you will notice that direct costs are $7,000 approximately. This is a district where the city is performing the work, city staff is. Utilities are quite low here. Notice that the total budget is $9,567 a year, approximately. But the maximum assessment that the city can charge, unless it went out to a Proposition 218 balloting process and property was elected to increase it, is maxed or capped at $2,400. What that means is that in VOLVO MEDIAN, the city is currently performing work beyond its means. At least there are no funds to pay for that work. The only thing they can do is up to $2,400 worth of work. So if you look at this district and you're not satisfied with the landscaping and the level of service you're getting, one of the things we're going to need to do is, as we create the new budgets for 16-17 and do those levies, we're having the city adjust the levels of service down so that we can balance these districts. We can't continue to be in the negative, which was a major issue for the city. The city over the years, they run their accounts on a ledger basis, so they are able to continue to spend money and run fund balances into the negative, because all the balances, all the accounts are put together into one big account. So, the city has covered those deficits from, pool money that they had around, and so they were able to cover that and balance that at zero, but we're not able to continue to do that in the future. So there are not going to be any deficits from the past, but beginning from this point forward, we're going to make the city balances, make sure they balance their level of service, the work they're doing, to how much we can collect, right? And so then, at that point, we'll approach property owners and figure out what they want to do with these districts, since there are not enough funds. Now, and you may wonder, why is the amount so small, okay? The way these work is, remember as I mentioned, some had inflators, others do not. Back in the day, the older districts, and you'll see this pattern here, in fact you can see it on this table, the lower numbers, this means these districts were formed a long, long time ago. Higher numbers means they're more recent. Notice that the higher numbers are all have surplus funds, or at least they are projected to have a surplus every year. That's because all of these districts have inflators, okay? Back in the day, assessment districts were formed without inflators. And that was very, very common, because back in the day, there was no need to go to property owners whenever there was a need for an increase. It was in 1996 with Prop 218 that sort of changed that, and then you now have to go out and ask property owners to get an approval to increase the assessments, right? So back in the day, many of these issues were just a flat rate, and you could change it every year and do whatever you needed to do in order to get the work done. So as a result, what has happened over the years is these are sort of frozen there for many years now, and the costs, utilities are going up, costs are going up, and they're just not able to sustain the work. The only way to fix that is either to lower the level of service, which may not be satisfactory to many of these property owners. I mean, if it already looks bad, it's going to look really bad, right? Or go out and increase the assessments. Basically create a new assessment district that replaces this one at a higher rate. So let me cover that real quickly, how that works, because it's important that anybody who may be in these communities are aware of that. First of all, the city has to go through a process that covers at least 3 resolutions. One, a resolution that says we intend to form an assessment district, right? That orders a report. That engineer's report I mentioned earlier needs to be created again. And so that report will determine what the boundaries are of the district, what the improvements are going to be, how much it's going to cost, and it will determine what the rate is going to be. That report then becomes available to the public, and the public is able to participate in the process. And in fact, in any of these districts, the property should be involved and going from house to house, knocking on doors, because really, if the city initiates this process on its own, most properties are going to think, oh, it's just a new tax, it's a higher tax, and they're not going to support it, right? So the only chance any of this has is for properties to organize and go out and kind of make the sale, right? But this information becomes available. In fact, if you form a committee of property owners. You can even participate in picking your improvements, what you like to have. You can make changes. There's no reason to have grass that consumes all this water. Remember, any improvement like that costs a lot of money is what you're going to be paying for. So I have communities that have organized and said, no, we want rocks, or we want this or that, or drought-resistant materials, right? So that will help you save money over time. And so I advise anybody that is in any of these districts to contact the city. To do that, make sure you contact Mike Moore, is his name. He's the lucky fellow. He's in finance. So Mike Moore, M-O-R-E. And he's in the finance department, and then he'll know what the process is and when this is going to happen, and be able to guide you on how to participate in the process, right? So the report goes out, or is established, we share with the community. Ballots are sent, so notices, ballots will be mailed to you. This is not an election, so it's not going to look anything like what you get from an election, okay? This is done through the city, comes in a regular envelope. It has a notice that tells you what the amount is going to be, what it pays for. It's got a ballot that it's just a piece of paper that tells you yes or no, and you have to sign it, mark it, return it. It has an envelope, but it does not have a return postage, okay? So is a different type of mail, and it's very important people know that so they don't just toss it, right? So what happens is properties will then send back the ballot. We'll have a public hearing at the city. That's what happens next. And at the public hearing, we have to keep all the ballots sealed. Nothing can be open until the end of the public hearing. So the public hearing, everybody comes up, and property owners can express their concerns or their support. And then we start opening envelopes. When we're counting these ballots, we're not actually counting the ballots. We're actually summing amounts in favor and amounts against. Now, in an assessment district where everybody pays the same, which happens a lot with, single-family homes, not a big deal. But if you have a district that has a mixture of commercial and homes and condos and maybe apartments, they'll have different rates. So you have to consider that one ballot from a commercial unit, which usually pays more, for $10,000, it's just one ballot, but if they say yes, we're counting $10,000. And then you could have 100 property owners say no, but if the amount is less and you total that, still the commercial wins, right? Because it's by amount. So that's how it's weighted. So we determine if it passed or not. The way it works is as long as there's no, the amount against the assessment does not exceed that in favor, then it passes. So in essence, and all you count are the ones that are returned. So you don't have to look at the whole district, just if you get one ballot, that's all you count, right? If you get zero will pass, because if you don't get any ballots back, that means you don't have a protest, you don't have a majority against it. So that's how that works, right? So that's the process, and the only way the city can exceed these amounts right here, the maximum assessment. They have to go out and reballot the district for a higher amount. I think the most important thing for you as a property owner is to participate in the process so that you help the city set a budget that you can afford. And what that really means is to select landscaping, sidewalk maintenance, types of improvements that will save you money, right? Remember, the improvements that you have now are those that were set by the developer. So times have changed. Water is very expensive now, and so you're going to want to address that differently. I mean, I drive through the city, it's got some beautiful areas, but they really consume a lot of water. They're not the type of drought-resistant material that you should have. Now, for this district, so I'll cover 41 through 58 now. Notice that all of them are contracted out. That means that a contractor is doing the work, city staff is not doing the work. Okay? Notice the utility bills. We're still tracking down some bills for 44 and 45 in here. We don't have all that information, but these additional improvements right here, these are the ones that I mentioned, the city, that the districts had authorized, but that were not being provided. So we're trying to actually get a real cost on this, but for now we have placed a $5,000 placeholder. Okay? So these are going to change a little bit between now and May. We have to get all this ready definitely by May for City Council, and in June we submit this data to the county in early July. So we have to balance all these budgets and finish whatever is left to do here. Now, when we look at these districts, notice that all of them have surplus amounts. In essence, what it says is the maximum assessment which has been inflated over the years, that's why it's so high, is more than sufficient to pay for the current level of service you're getting. So I think that's important to know. If you're not happy with the level of service, I think that what's going to happen here is a happy medium, right? Hopefully we'll repeat the project, get a better level of service. It may increase a little, maybe we save costs, but at the same time, we reduce the actual levy to match the new amount. So in a district like this one where the maximum is 67, and the city in the past has been levying approximately $67,000 a year, maybe we meet somewhere in the middle, maybe 40,000 is the magic number, right? You increase the level of service and reduce the amount, because you don't need it all. If we were to do nothing, what really happens here is that the city continues to accrue all the surpluses in the specific accounts. Remember, these are not funds of the city. They're kept in separate accounts only for your district. The funds can only be used for the authorized improvements in these documents. So the city general fund doesn't really dip into any of this. So if, let's say if we continue to do Pacific Cove and ended up with a $33,000 surplus at the end of this coming fiscal year, that does not go to the general fund. That stays in this fund, and it just keeps growing and growing to this huge surplus. Does that make sense? Any questions on the budget that you have on the screen? Good? Okay. Makes sense. Now, so what do we have? We really have two scenarios. We have districts that don't have money and districts that have money, right? That's pretty much how it works. The ones that do not have money are the ones that do not have an inflator, and it makes sense because $20 in 1992 is not $20 today. And the cost of water and materials has gone up. It's just these districts without an inflator were made to fail. There's no other way about it. Back in the day, they made sense because we didn't have the limitations where we had to go to the property to increase the amounts. But today's age, we can't do that. We have to go to the property owner. So they will have never survived anyway. So for this district, our immediate goal is to work with the city on reducing the level of service to align that cost to what the projected revenue is. Now, if we go back, it's really, frankly, it may not be possible. If you look at some of these districts, a district like 27, utilities are about $2,000, but look how much it's costing to maintain all that landscaping currently. Our only chance here is that we rebid this out to a contractor and that we get a contractor to do it for cheaper. And that's what we're currently doing. We're asking the city to rebid all the projects for all the districts. So this will be particularly a district that I will recommend highly that we move to the top of the list. Because if we're able to save some money here, then maybe we can get it under the $17,000 maximum assessment. Currently at 42, that's a lot of ground. That's a lot of water and a lot of lack of maintenance to reduce, right? It will be too much. And then the improvements are going to look even worse than they look now. So it's not a great solution. Ideally, we want to farm this out and maybe get a lower cost. That's the best solution here. So that's step one with those districts. And we have to do that in the next few months so we can establish a new budget for the coming year. If that does not work, let's say we just can't get a lower price, right? Or if we do and it's still not enough, then we need to evaluate, do we go out and increase the assessment? What do we do, right? Our other options are remove the improvements or replace them with rock or dirt or just abandon them. And I don't think that's a workable solution. I think most properties don't want that. It will lower the value of your homes, right? So you want a nice, pretty community. So I think if that was the case, what's going to happen is we'll be back in July. We'll have more of these meetings at these particular communities. We'll be back here and actually contact these property owners for that one district and hopefully get their support to organize and work with the city on what they want. You know, do they want to have the improvements changed, the budget set at a new level, and then find a middle ground, a happy medium, right, for everybody. In any case, at that point, we would need the community to help us then share the information with their neighbors to make sure that when we send that ballot, it's returned, you know, favorably. Otherwise, most people just toss it away or return it with a no. So that's very important that we get the support of the community, and we'll have as many meetings as needed to do that and provide information. Okay. So for these districts, it's very likely, at least for Rose Island, I feel it's very likely that we may be back in town. Notice the amount of square footage that is being maintained, 62,900 feet. That's a lot of work. So I'm not sure that we'll be able to balance that down to $17,000, but we'll try our best. This slide also shows how much each home, what their rate is, and it's $356 currently per home in that district. Okay. The next slide shows those districts that have a surplus or anticipated surplus. So 58, 41, 44, 45, 50, and number 2, again, number 2 is a special district, and it's the one with a self-maintained, so I'm not going to really cover it. But you can see here, the projected surpluses are 39, 33, and 10,000. First thing we're going to do is lower the assessment levy amount being placed on the tax roll, approximately by that amount, and possibly increase the level of service by contacting the contractor and making sure that the work is being performed. Okay. Some of the things we need to do here is to have the city staff as well provide additional staffing in general services so that they can actually check on the contractor more often and make sure the work is being completed. Because remember, some of these districts, all these districts are subbed out to a contractor, so if you're not happy with the work, it's either there's too low of a bid, right? Where the lowest bidder way too much, or that nobody's supervising them or not enough. Right? We want to fix that as well. So, in addition to bringing the future levies in line with actual costs, notice that these districts, except for 41, but 41 is, this is a temporary anomaly. We actually have to go back and make some corrections to the fund balances. So this probably will be taken care of on 41. But on the other districts, clearly there's surplus funds. Remember I said they need to stay in the accounts. They can't be used for anything else. And so this is from previous years. So you can see $160,000 in District 58, which is Westwood, is from previous levies where in previous years the city has over levy. There was no link between the budget and the actual levy. So these are the kind of findings that we're now having the city correct. So if that District 58, for example, having $160,000, if you went out to District 58, which is Westwood, and the city and properties determine all the trees need to be replaced, or they haven't been trimmed in years, or there's any catch-up work to be done, well, the city actually has the funds to do that. So our primary approach is to come up with a replacement plan, some sort of a catch-up plan to spend that surplus to bring the improvements up to par, right? And then ideally keep maintaining it at that level. So if they're at level C, we want to bring them to B. It may require a little bit of an investment. Use that portion of that fund balance, and then the rest is then provided back to the property owners as a credit in future years. So what happens is, in the future or for the next couple of years, you will still have, instead of a levy at all, you will have a very small amount, maybe $5 in your tax bill for a few years until the surplus is totally spent. So that's how we would do that. Okay. Any questions on this slide? All good? Okay. So a lot of work has been done. We found a lot of issues. What do we need to do next, and what are our final recommendations, and how we fix it, right? Because there's a lot of work to be done here. First thing we're recommending, and the city has already approved this position through a council meeting in February, is in the past, the city did not have a dedicated staff administering and managing these districts. The city has over about 60 assessment districts and a handful of Melrose districts, right? That's a lot of districts. That, in your case, with assessment districts, you possibly have 60 different contracts, because all the districts have different improvements. The only things they have in common are those three, right? Landscaping, tree trimming, and debris removal. Everything else is different. So that means you have to engage each contractor and track, okay, in this district, you need to do these items, not those items. So you have to track all that work, you have to manage all the accounts correctly, you have to process these records in the past that were not really being looked over as it should have been. So our primary recommendation, if there's anything we do, anything we do from these audits, is number one, we need to have a staff who's dedicated to it and responsible for it. That can be held accountable. Otherwise, you'll be back at the same place in a few years when You'll have districts with money, with districts with no money, and the work is not getting performed, right? So that's number one. Currently, we're rebidding all the maintenance work. We need to know what a level A and B, of service costs as compared to city staff doing the work. So, and compared to what the city is currently paying, right? So we need to know that so we can update the budgets currently for 16-17 and set those amounts correctly. And the goal is to bring the level of service up, right? So we need to know that we can't assume that city staff is doing it for cheaper or vice versa. We just don't know, right? Also, we need to staff, staff up in general services. That department is who handles the actual monitoring of the contractors, the payment of the invoices, verifying that everything has been completed. So we need to staff that as well to make sure that the lack of oversight doesn't happen again. Right? We're currently working on the 16-17 budgets, as I mentioned. This we cannot miss. The county has a deadline, which is the first week of July. So we have to create all these budgets, set new levels of service, and submit that data to the county. There's several resolutions that we have to go through. And so this is our main priority right now, because all these districts, all 60 of them, total to approximately $2.6 million. So we can't drop this part. We have to get the $2.6 million on the tax roll, right? So they show up on your tax bills and the city has the funds to pay and keep going, right? So that's our main priority at the moment. Now, this annual process that we're doing now, and I know it's a little late this year and it's a little hectic because we're having to update all these budgets and they've been audited and all that, but in future years, what I want you to know and share with your neighbors is that you should participate in this process. The city has to set these budgets every year. They need to set the rates every year, again, up to the maximum, but they have to go through a process where they take it to council and it gets approved. So this year, and you can write these down, there'll be, the initial reports will be submitted to council on June 7th, and then the public hearing will occur on June 21st. And you should expect that to happen every year. Approximately sometime at the end of May, sometime at the beginning of June, we'll move the date a little more, but the dates will change, but they're usually May and June, okay? And at these meetings, you can go, you can participate, but ideally, you want to participate early. You want to call Mike early in January of every year and just catch up and see, okay, what are you guys working on? What are the plans for the coming year? Maybe you can organize and come to the city and say, okay, we don't want those trees anymore. We don't want this grass. We want something different. That is your opportunity to participate in the process so that the budgets are set currently to what you're expecting and within the cap, right? Within the maximum. So I will share with your property owners that every January somebody should have it on their calendar to organize and see what's going on with these assessment districts. What happens next is the city starts preparing these reports, and they'll work, this next few months doing that, and they will be submitted to council, like I said, in the end of May sometime, maybe beginning of June at the latest. But it has to occur prior to July 1st. So you can always look at the council agenda, and you should be able to find these items every year. Last week or so of May, I will say, is a good, maybe first week of June, somewhere in there, you'll find the maintenance assessment districts. And if you don't know when it's happening, just call Mike, and he'll tell you all about it. So, as I mentioned, for some of the districts, we have to reduce the levels of service. We need to try to balance them. And those that we can't really balance them, then we'll have to come back, and in July, we'll be back at the city doing some more of these meetings throughout the fall, and trying to explain to those particular districts. So instead of having meetings like this where there's 8 or 10 districts, there'll be a smaller subset of districts to work one-on-one with the property owners on what the process is on how to do that if they so desire. Otherwise, what's going to happen is the level of service will have dropped and the improvements will look worse than they look now, which I don't think is a great solution, but there are ways to replace that material with something that, okay, maybe, it's much cheaper and there's a happy medium somewhere. Districts with surpluses, as I mentioned, will be working on a replacement plan. General Services is doing this, and it's going to be approaching some of the communities to determine, and they already have some feedback on, we know that people are not happy with certain trees and certain things that, there are districts that need mailboxes and things like that, so they already have a sort of a list of things that properties have been complaining about, so they want to work on that. And then continue these meetings that we have tonight, okay? Now, we don't have a big attendance tonight, and it's okay, I bring cookies, and the city brings cookies, but it's not enough. We should have brought steak, I know. But I want you to know this, when you go back and you talk to your friends and neighbors, as you can see, 90% of the presentation is the same, right? So I can introduce a topic. So if anybody from your community was not here tonight, so I'll have the budgets for the other communities and I can cover that. So they can catch up with me still, okay? So they won't miss out. And that is it. Now, what questions do you have?
I have a couple of questions.
Yes.
On slide 15, if you don't mind moving in there, please.
Right there?
Yes. Just want to question that on the District 27, is that 62,000 square foot factoring in the interior and the exterior of the compound?
No, it is exterior, right?
The exterior, because the interior is talking about the gated community, correct?
Correct.
Yes, not the gated community, I believe.
Yeah, so his question is on L&D 27, Rose Island, does the square footage of 62,000 cover the interior or exterior? And it's the exterior.
So that's exterior only.
Yeah, around the perimeter of the neighborhood. Normally these improvements, so what happens is when you enter the community and in front of your homes, a lot of that is private maintenance, it's not city maintenance. These are types of improvements that are mostly along the main roads or the entrance of the community. You have the entrance with all that nice landscaping in the middle and around. That's what these are usually for. And that's very common, and you'll see that in pretty much any assessment district. So it's usually the perimeter and major streets as you enter, signs and things like that.
So when did the audit begin?
We started it in June or so of last year, 2015, yeah. And so by October, we have our preliminary findings. So what we do is we came out and we drove through every district, actually mapped out all the improvements, confirmed the boundary lines, and interview staff members at both general services and finance and throughout the city. Anybody who had any part, setting budgets, resolutions, or anything, tracking the numbers, we interviewed them to figure out how they were doing it, and if it was up to par. There are industry standards for what we do. As a firm, we administer 1,000 of these districts, so we know what it takes, right? So based on those interviews and what we saw, then we said, okay, actually there are some problems here. And so we then came back and did additional audits that I mentioned today. And that's where we found the significant errors. And again, this is a very specialized area of practice. You don't go to college to learn how to do this. There's no class out there or program really. So to hire a staff member and say, oh, you're in charge of this, that just doesn't happen, right? You need to have some expertise in this field. And so if you don't, in this particular case, the city didn't have dedicated staff, so it was sort of spread out through the city. General services was doing something, finance was doing something, everybody was touching a little PCM there, but there was no single person really in charge that I can say, okay, you are in charge of it. Why is it not working, or what's wrong with it, or how to do it right? And so without that level of oversight, things just got dropped and not tracked correctly over the years.
Right. So Rose Island has been at a deficit, and for how long?
Very long.
So where is the money coming from?
The general fund. So all these years, what you've been seeing is the city just, remember, they have this massive bank account, if you look at it that way, right? Just all in one. But inside you have different accounts that they track. So yeah, they're able to go into the negatives and keep giving you the service, which has been happening. The staff kept coming out and cutting the grass and doing the work, but it just kept going negative and negative and negative and negative.
Right, and it seems like our service came to a halt around July.
Yeah, what happened, because at that point the city then finally realized, oh wow, this is really negative. So then you have to start cutting back on service and figure out how do we balance this now. But yeah, I should have never gotten that far, but unfortunately it did.
And they never sent us a letter to
No,
tell us.
not that I know of. I haven't heard of any
Yeah,
communication about this yet. So So that's, to me, from the results of the audit, the main thing is the city has to have somebody dedicated to it so that this doesn't happen again. The general fund doesn't have the sufficient funds to carry this. It's not supposed to. Subsidizing this issue really doesn't work. That's not the way to do it. It's not sustainable, and you wouldn't want that, because at any moment the general fund could need funds for something else. So, you're not the priority, right? They need those funds for something else. So, right now what we're trying to do is that has been covered, those negatives have been paid, so you will not be charged for that. Your assessments will not be increased for that reason. So we're trying to balance them and bring them to a zero right net at the end of the year, and then figure out now look at what the level of service is based on the amount that they can charge. And then I'm sure most people won't be happy, and then try to increase those assessments or change the improvements completely. Now the changing of improvements, unfortunately, there's a lot the city can do, but at the same time it has to fit the general plan. You don't want a city where it's just, you could put cement through everything, but you don't want that, right? So there are also standards that the city's going to try to uphold, and so you want to work with the city on that. There are options, but I wouldn't recommend that we just let everything go to dirt, for example. That's just not a solution. It affects your community, it affects your homes, and the value is just not. So there has to be a happy medium somewhere.
So right now, we've been at a deficit, and our landscaping is
It's bad.
poor.
Yes.
It is horrible. So are they not going to do anything until the new budget rolls out, or?
I am meeting with the city manager on that topic, in fact, to figure out how much more we can extend that, if at all. Ideally, if we could extend it while properties are organized and trying to help us work and figure out what the new rates may be, right? I think that would be a happy medium, but I just don't know how much they can do. So all I can say at this moment is, yes, I understand your concern that in order to balance that district, you can see bringing it down from $42,000 to 17 is a big change. So if you're, like you're saying, it's going to look really, really bad then. Maybe there is a happy medium where we can, the city can continue to do work for a little longer while property owners organize and help pass an assessment increase. That would be ideal. So I'm definitely working with the city manager on that topic as well. I just don't have an answer at the moment. Normally to form a new district and replace it takes anywhere from 4 to 8 months. The difference there, the real core time is 4 months. We can form it as fast as 4 because we have to have those resolutions. But if there's a lot of community outreach where we have to have many of these meetings, right? The more meetings we have, the more we can explain it, then we need more time. But if property is organized and you want to organize as early as now, please contact Mike and he will set you up with me, and I'll be able to have meetings already and kind of get you going. I can come out and share how to do it, what things to tell your property owners and neighbors, and how to organize. So you can start now. That will actually get you going, and it wouldn't take us long. Hopefully we can then have a district up and running before the end of the year, right? September, October, that would be awesome. So we only have a few months to deal with, and then we can work on that. Well, I want to thank everybody for being here. I know that you have better things to do, I'm sure. I commend you for that. This is very important. I know it affects you and your community. The best thing I can say is please share this with your neighbors. I know that the city, there's a history here in the city of Oxnard with other issues that have come up over the years, so I keep hearing a lot of things from property owners. I don't pretend to be an Oxnard resident. I haven't been here, This is my specialty. So I've been hired to help the city with this process, and I can assure you that we're doing the best we can. We are reviewing a lot of invoices, pushing staff really hard to get this fixed, and we have a plan to get it fixed. The city's working on it, it's making progress. They have approved the hiring of the new staff, but it just takes time, unfortunately. We'll be on board through January. We'll be out here having more meetings in the fall. We're not going anywhere yet. Our ultimate goal is to leave this with the city with staff that is trained. We hope to have these staff members hired so we can train them. And then come out once in a while and do maybe a wellness check, right? And just make sure that they're still where we left them. But ideally, the best way to do this is locally. You can always have consultants do this because we're the experts on this particular field. But being local and talking to property owners, going on site and actually looking at the improvements speaks value. So you do that by having city staff, and for you as a property owner, that's where you can call, you can reach, you can show up at City Hall, and you have an impact. At the end of the day, assessment districts are probably one of the best forms of democracy. They are the most local. What you pay for is in this fund that can only be used for these improvements, what you see in that report, right? And you have a voice, where everything else, you pay your ad valorem taxes and your property tax bill, and they just get spread out. The city only gets 17 cents on the dollar. It goes to the general fund, and they can do many things with it. That's not the case with these. So participate, because you actually do have power here. You can drive this process, but you have to organize. Most properties will not understand this, okay? Your neighbors will not know what this is, how it behaves. It is not an election. I don't know how many times I can repeat that. I hear it all the time. They are expecting to receive an election packet, all that stuff you get. No, you will never see that. So when they get an envelope regarding this, they just toss it. So it's very important that they know what it is and how it works, and just reach out and participate, and I appreciate you being here for that, so thank you.